Welcome back to Issues of Faith. We're talking about addressing mass incarceration from a faith perspective. We have with us the Reverend Jeannie Alexander, former chaplain at River Bend, and Reverend Eric Brown, a community leader. They are pushing to change the Constitution, to change language that was put in the Constitution in the 1800s, abolishing slavery, except if you've been convicted of a crime. And we have the language, we'll continue to put it up. And I want to ask you, why is it important to start here?
So for me, it's semi-twofold, I guess you could say, especially for the black community. When we first talked about letting go of what slavery is, and then how, again, except for exceptions of when it comes to those who are imprisoned. So it goes into like a historical mode. So one, it starts off within slavery, and then it starts for the black folks going into convict leasing. So you're no longer necessarily a slave, but now if you are particularly based on the color of your skin, found within a crime, now goes into convict leasing. Convict leasing then goes into Jim and Jane Crow segregation, and now it's really gotten more into this drug war, or crimes on drugs, which I think is particularly crimes on black folk, and more that you're seeing black people that's being locked up and stored up. So for me, it's almost a historical sense of people might just think this is about slavery, but how this is kind of transitioned more and more, particularly for the black community. And like we just said, 1 out of 3 black males are being locked up. I believe it's a big number of black women now that's really fastest growing coming into the black community. So it's still a lot of ways it's still in connection with slavery and how this particularly looks for that. So for me, it's a big faith perspective because it really hits the black church. It really hits families and homes. So we're not even just talking about a person that's in prison. We're also talking about their families that are being affected, still having to pay for some of their commissary things that's in the prison, and it's really affecting them on how they live on the outside. So it's not just necessarily an individual person's issue that's going on. This is really truly a family issue. And so
and how surprised are you that that language is in the Constitution?
I'm not surprised. It's kind of the problem. I'm not.
Do you think other people would be?
I think people may not pay attention to it, but I think as far as representing myself, I'm not really surprised at all. I do think somebody like Jenny, and I'm really proud of her efforts, needs to push that language and let people know that it is still in there and that it's time to change what that language says and what that particularly means for different communities in America.
So you are part of No Exceptions Prison Collective. What is that, and what are you doing to try and change the language there in the Constitution?
Well, No Exceptions, we work on sentencing reform efforts, internal conditions of prisons, the parole board, really working to bring, and this is something that Eric alluded to earlier, to bring out the narratives of people who are prisoners, because people aren't just prisoners. You can't be reduced to an action. These are fathers and sons. These are grandmothers. These are wives. These are daughters. And it's not giving a voice because people who are caged have a voice, but helping to amplify that voice. And then to take that and those experiences and the wisdom that we know from social science, from other countries, and to understand that what we're doing doesn't work and there's a better way. And so fighting hard for that reform every day, fighting to bring families back together. You know, we see ourselves as a pro-life, pro-family effort, you know. When you're talking about pro-life, it's not a single issue. You know, it's a womb-to-tomb issue for us, and it matters. It's not very pro-life if you've created a system that tears families apart for 10 years, 30 years, 51 years permanently, and destabilizes a community and cages humans, often without hope of reconciliation or redemption.
Few politicians, maybe no politician, has been elected by saying, I want to be softer on crime.
Right.
And so how do you move forward with this? And again, there's people out there, if someone commits murder, there is very little sympathy for that.
Right.
But what we're talking about with mass incarceration, it's more than murder.
Right.
Right? And so I guess how do you communicate that?
Well, I mean, I think there's a false dichotomy. People can be held accountable, and you can also make intelligent, wise policy decisions for your state and for your country. So you can hold someone accountable, and it is often the case that someone may need to be socially segregated for many years sometimes. But the smart thing to do is to understand that there is an economic impact on the community and on a family. So that what we would hope is that people who have made bad choices, you know, and have hurt people, have an opportunity and have the ability to pursue an education, to pursue therapy, to have an understanding of why they did what they did, so they could then come back to the community so that then they contribute to taxes, they contribute to the economy, they help restabilize their families. So it's not about being soft on crime, it's about being smart on policy. And moreover, you can be as tough on crime as you want and not be pro-slavery. I mean, it's interesting to me that this would be controversial at all, right? I find it very peculiar that we could bring this bill up to the floor of the General Assembly, which will happen this coming session. And I'm very interested to hear how politicians who will oppose this are going to word their opposition. Because what's very clear is that if you oppose amending this in the Tennessee Constitution, then what you are saying is that you support some forms of slavery.
It seems like if it were written today, and again, this was written in the 1800s, it would be written differently, at the very least. And so, all right, how confident are you that it's a long road to change the Constitution.
Sure.
Where do you begin, and how confident are you that you can do it?
Well, again, it's that faith perspective. It's a long arc toward justice. It's long fights. But it begins from a very practical manner of having a bill, right? And the Tennessee legislature having sponsors for that bill, which we do have, you know, and so it has to go through a legislative process. It has to pass the General Assembly by a certain percentage of votes, and then eventually it comes up for a public referendum in the state of Tennessee. And that's where I anticipate, and it pains me to say this, that we may have our toughest fight, is when that comes up for as a referendum and for a popular vote within our state.
And so I want to put up the language now again.
Sure.
We'll put it up again and look at it. And tell me again what you would change. So this is, again, in our Constitution, Section 33, and this is what abolishes slavery. And it says slavery, involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime where the party has been duly convicted, are forever prohibited in this state. What would you change?
Well, what we would do is eliminate that criminality clause so that it would read that slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited in this state.
What would that change in our prisons right now? Would it change anything, or is it just kind of a perspective?
You know, I think language matters. And one thing that it changes is the way individuals are viewed. It's one thing to view someone as a person who is being socially segregated, who is imprisoned for an action they committed, for a crime. It's another thing to look at that person as property of the state. And what the bottom line is they are a slave. And they have no personal agency. The family certainly has no control over the body or the person. I mean, prisoners are transported on buses that are referred to as chain buses, you know? I mean, the language of slavery still exists. And as long as we have that in our psyche, as long as that is in our subconscious as a community, as a culture, then you can do just about anything to a prisoner and get away with it, unfortunately.
And we have about 2 minutes left. What do you want people to take away? What do you want people to understand?
I'd say one is that we really dig deep and understand our history. This is something, like you said, it's 8 languages from the 1800s. And I think it's something that when we hear small words or small things, we kind of overlook and we never go back to it. But it's definitely a big, impactful thing, especially for Black community, minority community, immigrants, to really think about our history. So I always say to go back to books like The New Jim Crow, Condemnation of Blackness, the new documentary 13 that's out by Ava DuVernay. These are things that are really important, and we should always take back and make sure that we educate ourselves and potentially see how this affects us. But what I really appreciated from a Jenny standpoint is that somebody has to start somewhere, and so that's the biggest piece.
And about 45 seconds left. What do you want people to take away? How could they get involved if they want to?
Yeah, absolutely. They could go to noexceptions.net. They can get in touch with us. We're having showings of 13th all over Tennessee to bring up this issue. It's a documentary. And you know what? This is not a liberal or a conservative issue. This is a human issue. And I think that in this country, both liberals and conservatives have already agreed that slavery is wrong. that it's not permissible, and we've got some cleaning up to do in our Constitution to change our culture.
And are you confident? How confident are you going forward?
Oh, Ben, I'm always confident. It's like it can be a long fight, and I'm still confident because I believe that people can rise to the best of themselves, and we don't have to continue to be trapped by this language of slavery. We don't have to continue to destroy families and communities. We're better than that.
Well, I want to thank you. Reverend Jeannie Alexander, thank you for being here. And Reverend Eric Brown, minister, pastor, community leader, thank you for being with us. Thank all of you for being with us as well. Have a great day, everybody.